They said the triplets would not survive the night. 3 fragile heirs to a crumbling empire, their crystalline skin dimming beneath the violet skies of Valthera Prime, their tiny lungs struggling against air that should have sustained them. The Empress herself had tried everything: ancient physicians, forbidden technology, prayers to gods that no longer answered. But when the palace doors opened to admit a human, a grieving single father with calloused hands and eyes that had known too much loss, the entire court held its breath. What he did in that chamber would either damn him forever or rewrite the destiny of 2 species. Before we start, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Oh, and before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from you and always read every message. The grand medical chamber of Valthera Prime gleamed with cold, sterile beauty. Walls of living crystal pulsed with bioluminescent veins, casting ethereal shadows across polished floors. Outside the towering windows, 3 moons hung in perfect alignment, their light filtering through the perpetual twilight in shades of amethyst and pearl. The air hummed with advanced technology, microscopic medical drones moving like silver dust, diagnostic fields shimmering between dimensions, healing pods that could regenerate organs in hours. But none of it was working. David Reeves stood at the entrance, his worn travel bag clutched in one hand, his daughter's photograph pressed against his chest beneath his shirt. The palace guards had escorted him through corridors that seemed to breathe, past courtiers whose eyes gleamed with suspicion and barely concealed disdain. A human in the imperial palace. It was unthinkable. Inside the chamber, 3 incubation pods stood in a triangle formation, each one containing a child no larger than a human infant. The triplets, Lysara, Telian, and Vera, lay motionless, their skin a dull grey where it should have sparkled with the characteristic iridescence of the Valtharan royal bloodline. Their small chests rose and fell with painful irregularity, and even from across the room, David could see the faint trembling of their tiny limbs. "You're the human." The voice cut through the silence like a blade. David turned to face Empress Zyrane herself, and for a moment, all the briefings and diplomatic protocols fled his mind. She was devastating, not in the human sense of beauty, but in the way a supernova was beautiful, terrible and magnificent. Her skin rippled with patterns of light that shifted with her emotions. Her eyes were pools of liquid silver that seemed to see through flesh and bone to the soul beneath. "Your Majesty." David bowed, the gesture feeling inadequate. "I came as quickly as I could. They told me you were experienced with dying children, that you had lost your own daughter to the wasting sickness, that you had studied every treatment, every experimental procedure, every desperate hope that medicine could offer." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Sarah died 3 years ago. She was 6. I couldn't save her." "Then why are you here?" A tall figure with 4 arms and skin like polished obsidian stepped forward. "Your radiance, surely you cannot be serious. A human? Our finest physicians have already failed." Zyrane's words silenced the room. "Every single one of you has failed. My children are dying, and you offer me equations and apologies." David walked toward the incubation pods, ignoring the gasps and protests. Up close, the triplets were heartbreaking. Lysara, the eldest by mere minutes, had her mother's silver eyes, though they were barely open. Telian's small hand was pressed against the transparent wall of his pod, as if reaching for something. Vera, the smallest, had stopped moving entirely except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. The medical displays around each pod told a story of systematic failure. The triplets' genetic markers were rejecting every treatment, their bodies attacking the very medicine designed to heal them. "Your physicians are trying to force their bodies to accept the treatments," David said, his voice growing stronger. "But their immune systems are too aggressive, too perfect. Every intervention is seen as an invasion. What if we stopped fighting their bodies and started working with them?" A physician with crystalline protrusions growing from his skull scoffed. "Primitive human medicine? No." David's voice cut through the dismissal. "You've considered what works for healthy Valtharan children, but these 3 aren't healthy. They're fighting something in their own genetics. With Sarah, every treatment made her worse. The doctors kept increasing doses, trying to overwhelm her body's resistance. But in the last weeks, I tried something different. I stopped all treatments, focused only on comfort, on reducing stress, on letting her body rest. She didn't survive, but she had 3 days of peace. And I've spent 3 years studying what I should have done differently. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of equipment and the faint, labored breathing of the triplets. You want to remove our children from life support? The four-armed courtier's voice dripped with outrage. This is madness. But Zerain raised one elegant hand. She stared at David with an intensity that made him feel transparent. If I allow this and they die, I will have you executed in ways that will make legends of horror seem merciful. I understand. Do you? Do you understand what it is to watch your children slip away, to feel powerless despite all the power in the universe? Yes. David met her gaze without flinching. I understand exactly that, which is why I'm here. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Two parents separated by species and circumstance, united by the most fundamental pain in the universe. Prepare the protocols, Zerain said finally. You will work under constant supervision. Any sign that you are harming my children? Your Majesty, this is unprecedented, the four-armed courtier protested. My children are dying, Vorath. Precedent means nothing to corpses. But as the medical staff began their reluctant preparations, none of them noticed the way Lysara's eyes had tracked David's movements. None of them saw the faint pulse of light that flickered across her skin when he spoke about Sarah. The triplets had already chosen him, and in the shadows of the Imperial Palace, others watched with very different intentions. The medical staff assembled in the Grand Chamber looked like an artist's fever dream of evolved physicians. Dr. Kelthis, the senior physician with crystalline growths mapping his neural pathways in visible light, stood with his 6 arms crossed in barely suppressed fury. David's proposed protocol was displayed on a holographic field that hung in the air like frozen lightning. This is not medicine, Kelthis pronounced. This is surrender. Reduce all active treatments by 70%. Eliminate all immune suppressors. Lower environmental stresses. Reduce light by 40%, sound by 60%, and remove them from the isolation pods. David looked up at the assembled physicians. They're dying now, faster every day, despite everything you're doing. Because everything you're doing is the problem. They'll die within hours. A young physician stepped backward in shock. They're dying now, David said quietly. I watched my daughter's body reject every treatment. I watched her doctors increase doses until her organs began to fail. These children's immune systems can't distinguish between the medicine and the disease anymore. Their bodies are warriors just like their mother. We just need to stop giving them so many enemies. A diagnostic specialist moved closer to examine the data. The human is not entirely incorrect. The cumulative stress response shows nothing that justifies this madness, Vorath interrupted. Your Radiance, I must formally protest this course of action. Zerain rose from her throne with fluid grace. You speak of precedent and proper protocol, but I notice, Vorath, that none of those physicians or healers stand here today with a solution. She descended toward David. What you propose terrifies them. It should terrify me. You ask me to trust in what? Hope? Faith? No, Your Majesty. I'm asking you to trust in their bodies, in their will to live. Prepare the protocol, Zerain commanded. The next hours were a controlled descent into organized chaos. The medical staff began the delicate process of withdrawing treatments, and slowly, carefully, they began preparing to remove the triplets from their isolation pods. The moment came at last. The pod seals released with a soft hiss. David moved immediately to Lysara's pod, lifting her with practiced care, the same way he'd once held Sarah. She was lighter than a human infant, her skin cool to the touch but not cold, and when he cradled her against his chest, he felt the faint flutter of her heartbeat. It was impossibly fast, nothing like a human pulse, but it was there. Vital signs dropping, announced a diagnostic specialist, alarm creeping into his voice. oxygen saturation falling to critical levels. "Give him time," David said, his hand gently supporting Lysara's head. "His lungs are learning to process unfiltered air." "Time is the one thing we don't have," Vorath said. Silence. Zirane's word was absolute. Her eyes never left the triplets, and her hands gripped the throne arms so tightly that the living crystal beneath her fingers had begun to crack. The minutes stretched like hours. Lysara's breathing remained shallow but steady. Telian's oxygen levels stopped dropping and held at a precarious level, and Vera's eyes opened. They were silver, like her mother's, and they fixed on David with a focus that seemed impossible for a dying infant. For a moment that stretched into eternity, child and human stared at each other, and David felt something pass between them. Not words, but a sense of recognition, of understanding. Then Vera's small hand moved, reaching out with trembling fingers toward David's face, and when she touched his cheek, every monitor in the chamber chimed simultaneously. "Impossible," breathed Dr. Keltis, staring at the displays. Her vital signs just stabilized. David barely heard him. He was watching as Lysara's skin began to shimmer with the faintest hint of light, as Telian's breathing deepened and strengthened, as all three children seemed to respond to something that no Valtharan technology could measure. They were responding to him. But while the chamber watched this impossible recovery begin, in the observation gallery above, hidden behind one-way crystal, a figure watched with eyes that gleamed with cold calculation. The mysterious Watcher's hand moved to activate a secure communication device. "The human's method is working. Adjust the timeline. We move sooner than planned." The 6th hour marked the point of no return. If David's protocol was going to fail, it would happen now. The medical staff had made that clear with charts and projections. The chamber had taken on the atmosphere of a death watch, but the inevitable wasn't happening. "Neural activity is increasing." Dr. Keltis's voice held genuine confusion as he studied the holographic displays swirling around Lysara's resting platform. "This makes no sense. According to every model we have, she should be entering organ failure by now." David sat in a chair with Vera sleeping against his chest, while Lysara and Telian rested on platforms arranged around him. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but he didn't dare close them for more than a few seconds. "Maybe your models don't account for everything," he said quietly, his hand gently stroking Vera's back in small, soothing circles. It was the same motion he'd used with Sarah. A young physician approached with a scanning device. "May I?" When David nodded, she ran the scanner over Vera. "By the eternal depths, her cortisol levels have dropped 40%. That's impossible without pharmaceutical intervention." "It's not impossible if she feels safe," David said. "Safe?" Vorath's voice dripped with disdain. "These are royal heirs of the Valtharan Empire. They have been protected by the most advanced security systems in the known galaxy since conception. They are as safe as any living being has ever been. Safe from external threats, maybe, but not safe from stress, from overstimulation, from the constant assault of medical procedures and monitoring equipment and sterile environments that feel nothing like what they need." "And what do they need?" Dr. Keltis asked, and this time there was no mockery in his tone, only genuine scientific curiosity. David looked down at Vera's sleeping face. "The same thing all children need. Connection, comfort, someone to hold them when they're scared. Someone who chooses to be there, not because it's their job or duty, but because they care." Zirane moved closer, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she reached out to touch one of her children. Her hand, elegant and alien, trembled slightly as it came to rest on Lysara's forehead. The child stirred, her silver eyes opening to focus on her mother's face. "I have always cared," Zirane whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "Every moment since I knew they existed within me, I have cared. I know, but you're also an empress. You have 1,000 duties, 1,000,000 eyes watching your every move. When was the last time you just held them? Not as a ruler ensuring the succession, but as a mother loving her children." The question seemed to strike Zirane like a physical blow. Her hand drew back, and the light beneath her skin flickered with emotions David couldn't name. The responsibilities of the throne, the demands of state. Don't allow for weakness, David finished. Don't allow for the vulnerability of just being a parent. But they're dying, Your Majesty, and they don't need an empress right now. They need their mother. For a long moment, Zerain stared at him, and David saw the war being fought behind those silver eyes. Duty versus desire, strength versus vulnerability, the weight of an empire versus the needs of 3 tiny children. Then slowly, she reached out and took Vera from David's arms. The transformation was immediate. Vera's eyes opened, focusing on her mother's face, and a sound emerged from her tiny throat. Not quite a cry, not quite a coo, but something that needed no translation. Recognition, need, love. And Zerain, Empress of the Valtharan people, ruler of 100 worlds, began to weep. The tears that fell from her eyes were not water but liquid light, drops of luminescence that sparkled in the air before dissipating into harmless energy. They fell on Vera's face, and where they touched, the child's skin began to glow with the same radiance. The maternal bonding response, breathed the young physician. It's activating. But that should be impossible. The triplets' condition should have suppressed all social biological responses. Unless, Doctor, Kelthis said slowly, his crystalline neural pathways blazing with sudden understanding. The condition itself was caused by the absence of that response, unless what we've been treating as a genetic disorder is actually a stress-induced rejection cascade triggered by lack of parental bonding. David felt the weight of exhaustion lifting slightly as understanding rippled through the medical staff. In human children, we call it failure to thrive. When infants don't receive enough physical contact, emotional connection, they can develop all kinds of symptoms that look like medical conditions, but they're not sick. They're lonely, scared, disconnected. Zerain held Vera closer, her entire body beginning to resonate with the same light that pulsed through her daughter's skin. On their platforms, Lysara and Telian began to glow as well, responding to their mother's presence, to the bond that was finally being acknowledged and strengthened. All this time, Zerain whispered, her voice thick with grief and wonder. All the treatments, the procedures, the desperate searches for cures, and what they needed was simply me. Not simply, David corrected gently. Never simply. Love is the hardest medicine to prescribe because it requires the healer to be vulnerable too. But it's also the only medicine that works when everything else fails. The hours that followed felt like watching spring arrive after an endless winter. Lysara's skin regained its iridescent shimmer. Telian's breathing strengthened until he no longer needed supplemental oxygen. Vera, still cradled in her mother's arms, began to make small sounds. Not distress, but the normal vocalizations of a healthy infant exploring the world. The medical staff documented everything with growing amazement. Cellular regeneration rates that tripled, neural pathways that began forming new connections, immune responses that shifted from hyperactive to appropriately protective. I don't understand it, admitted Dr. Kelthis as the 12th hour approached. From a purely biological standpoint, physical contact shouldn't have this level of measurable impact on systemic cellular function. Maybe we're not so different after all, David suggested, holding Lysara now. Maybe what matters most is universal, despite what we look like on the outside. Vorath, who had been conspicuously silent for hours, finally spoke. If word spreads that the royal heirs were saved not by Valtharan medical science, but by human sentiment, the implications for the Empire's standing are irrelevant. Zerain's voice carried absolute authority. She was sitting now, with Vera asleep against her shoulder and Telian resting in the crook of one arm. She looked exhausted but radiant. My children are healing. Nothing else matters. The vital signs are stable, announced the diagnostic specialist, her voice trembling with something like awe. All 3 children are showing improvement across every measurable index. If this continues, they could be removed from critical monitoring within 48 hours. 48 hours. After weeks of deterioration, of desperate treatments that only made things worse, of watching 3 royal heirs slip toward death, 48 hours to recovery, because someone had decided to hold them. David felt Lysara's small hand grip his finger. When he looked down, her silver eyes met his, and again he felt that sense of connection, of understanding that transcended species and language. "Thank you," Zirain said softly. "You gave me back my children." "There is no honor in my empire, no wealth in my treasury that could repay such a gift. I didn't do it for payment," David replied, his throat tight. "I did it because I couldn't save my own daughter, but maybe I could save someone else's." But in the shadows of the observation gallery, the watching figure's expression had shifted from calculation to cold fury. The plan had accounted for the triplets' deaths, for the political chaos that would follow. It had not accounted for their recovery. Adjustments would need to be made, permanent adjustments. Days brought transformation that rippled through the palace. The triplets continued to improve at impossible rates. During a restless night, David discovered the memorial wing, hallways lined with holographic displays showing thousands of faces. "The honored dead," Dr. Kelthis explained, approaching. "Every Valtheran who has served the Empire with distinction. We believe that to be forgotten is the true death. So long as someone remembers, the legacy persists. Every species probably has its own version of that understanding," David said quietly. "We just call it different things. Love, connection, the willingness to sacrifice everything for someone you love." An alarm began to pulse through the palace, the assembly bell. The imperial court was being summoned. The medical wing erupted in controlled chaos. Zirain's expression shifted from maternal softness to imperial steel. The triplets were placed in protective pods. "What's happening?" David asked. "The Council of Regent Houses has called for an emergency session," Zirain explained. "They invoke ancient law, the right to question matters of succession when the heirs are deemed compromised." Compromised? David felt anger rising. "The triplets are healing by human intervention." Vorath's voice cut through the room as he entered, flanked by courtiers wearing elaborate sashes that marked them as representatives of the most powerful noble houses. "The future rulers of the Valtheran Empire are dependent on alien methods and alien caregivers. That is what the measures show, human." An elderly Valtharan, whose skin bore the deep purple hues of extreme age, stepped forward. "Ancient law is clear. The heirs must be raised in accordance with Valtharan tradition, strengthened by Valtharan science, prepared for rulership through Valtharan wisdom. Ancient law was written when the Empire spanned 3 star systems instead of 300, Zirain said with dangerous softness. "I should go," David said quietly. "This is a Valtharan matter." "No." Zirain's hand caught his arm. "You are part of this now. Your methods saved my children. I will not repay that by abandoning you to political wolves." "How touching," Vorath said. "But perhaps we should examine exactly what methods this David Reeves employed." He pulled out a data crystal that projected information into the air. "Who was investigated by Earth's medical authorities for experimental treatment of a minor? Who administered unapproved medications? Who subjected his dying child to procedures that violated Earth's medical ethics protocols? Who was barred from further access to experimental treatment programs after his daughter's death?" The room went silent. David felt the ground drop away as his darkest shame was laid bare. "I was desperate. Sarah was dying, and the approved treatments weren't working. I tried to find alternatives. Some weren't approved, but I would never have hurt her deliberately. Yet she died anyway," Vorath continued relentlessly. "Died while under your care, subjected to your untested theories. And now you propose to apply those same theories to the royal heirs. Tell me, human, should we trust our future to someone who already failed so spectacularly?" The words hit like physical blows. Every fear David had carried since Sarah's death came crashing down. "The human's qualifications are irrelevant," Zirain said, her voice cutting through the charged silence. "My children were dying under the care of the finest Valtheran physicians. They are now healing. The result speaks for itself, does it?" The elderly Valtheran, Lord Zerathis, moved forward. Or does it speak to an empress so compromised by grief that she cannot see she is being manipulated? Perhaps you are not fit to make decisions regarding the succession while under such influence. The chamber erupted into shouting. But Zyraine's voice didn't shout. It filled the chamber with such force that the walls themselves seemed to resonate. I am Empress of Valthera, chosen by law and by blood. My fitness to rule is not subject to the whims of ambitious courtiers. My children are healing. That is the only fact that matters. With respect, Your Radiance, Vorath said. The Council disagrees. We invoke the right of validation. Let the human prove his worth through trial, as any Valtharan would be required to do before assuming responsibility for the royal heirs. Zyraine's luminous skin flickered with alarm. The right of validation hasn't been invoked in 3 centuries. It was designed to test Valtharan nobles, not aliens. Vorath's smile was cruel. Then perhaps the human should have remained on his own world. What does the right involve? David asked quietly. David? No. Zyrane moved toward him, her eyes pleading. The right is meant to prove worthiness through demonstration of knowledge, skill, and legacy. It assumes the candidate has access to family archives, ancestral wisdom, the accumulated achievements of their bloodline. You have none of that here. Then I'll use what I do have, David said. He met Zyraine's gaze. I have Sarah's legacy. Everything I learned from trying to save her. If that's not enough, then nothing is. The rite of validation will commence at dawn tomorrow, Lord Zarathis pronounced. The human will be tested on knowledge, wisdom, and legacy. When he fails, as he inevitably must, he will leave Valthara Prime immediately. And when he succeeds, Zaraine said, her voice like tempered steel, the Council will acknowledge his right to continue his work with my children. Agreed? The courtiers exchanged glances. They believed he would fail. Agreed, Vorath said, and his smile promised suffering. In the shadows of the palace, the mysterious watcher smiled. Everything was proceeding perfectly. The human would fail, and when chaos reached its peak, the real plan could finally be set in motion. The grand amphitheater was carved from a single massive crystal that had grown from the planet's core over millions of years. It held 50,000 Valtharans, and from what David could see as he was escorted to the central platform, every seat was filled. Ziraine sat on a throne of living light at the amphitheater's apex. Near her, the triplets rested in their protective pods, still recovering, still fragile, but present. The Council of Regent Houses occupied elevated platforms surrounding the central arena. Vorath stood at their center, his forearms spread in threatening welcome. David Reeves of Earth, Vorath's voice boomed through the amphitheater. You stand before the assembled might of the Valtharan Empire to prove your worthiness. The rite of validation consists of 3 trials: knowledge, wisdom, and legacy. Succeed in all 3, and you will be acknowledged. Fail in even one, and you will depart our world forever. Do you accept?